The groom's gloves lay on the altar rail like two small white accusations. For one long, airless moment, Miss Isolde Trelawney could not understand why everyone had stopped breathing. The chapel of St. Bartholomew's in Mayfair had been built to flatter rank and sanctify consequence. All pale stone, polished oak, and narrow shafts of late spring light, falling across rows of titled guests who had come to watch a respectable marriage bind a dwindling Trelawney fortune to the younger son of the House of Celdon. The vicar waited with his prayer book open. Lady Nesta Trelawney gripped the edge of her pew until her knuckles shone. Somewhere behind Isolde, a woman whispered, then another answered, and the sound moved like a lace fan opening in the heat. Lord Miles Ashenford was not there. His place before the altar remained empty. His gloves were there instead, folded with exquisite care, as though absence itself had been dressed for ceremony. Beside them rested a small note, broken open by the vicar's trembling hand. Isolde could see only the slant of the writing, not the words. Yet she knew before anyone spoke that the sentence inside had already changed her life. Her veil weighed suddenly on her head. Beneath it, the small silver crescent buckle sewn onto her left bridal slipper pressed against the side of her foot, a familiar, secret pressure. It had belonged to her mother, who had worn it on the day she married a man with more pride than money and more tenderness than the world had expected. Isolde had sewn it there herself before dawn, not for luck exactly, but for courage. Courage, she now discovered, could be a cruelly small thing when an entire chapel turned to measure the worth of an abandoned woman. The vicar cleared his throat. "My lady," he said to Lady Nesta, though his eyes moved helplessly toward Isolde, "Lord Miles Ashenford has sent word that he cannot bind himself." The words did not strike like thunder. They entered quietly, almost politely, and ruined everything. Lady Nesta made a sound so sharp it might have been grief if it had held more affection. Isolde heard a gentleman cough into his glove. She heard silk shifting, heads turning, fans snapping open. She heard with hideous clarity Lady Euphemia Larkspur murmur from the side pew. How unfortunate, though perhaps not entirely unexpected. Isolde did not look at her. She kept her gaze on the altar rail, on the gloves, on the note, on the space where Miles should have stood, with his practiced smile and soft, restless eyes. Miles had promised her very little beyond marriage, and yet the promise had been enough to hang her future upon. Now even that thin rope had been cut. Lady Nesta leaned close enough for her breath to stir Isolde's veil. "Do not stand there like a stone, girl," she hissed. "Say something. Apologize. If there has been some misunderstanding, you must not make it worse." Apologize. The word settled in Isolde's mouth like ash. She had been trained all her life to make other people comfortable, to smooth over unpaid bills with pleasant silence, to lower her eyes when wealthier relations spoke of prudence, to smile when dresses were altered for a second season, and ribbons turned to hide fading edges. But something in her refused this final obedience. She would not apologize for being left. She would not offer her shame as a cushion for a coward. Isolde stepped forward. The chapel blurred at the edges, not from tears, but from the force it took to remain upright. Her left foot touched the shallow step before the altar. The strap of her slipper gave way, not loosened, not slipped, gave way with a small, clean snap. Her ankle twisted. She caught herself before she fell. One hand reaching toward the carved end of the altar rail, the other closing around nothing but air. A gasp lifted through the chapel. Her veil jerked to one side. The silver crescent buckle struck the stone step and rang once, bright and delicate, before coming to rest near the hem of her gown. For a heartbeat, everyone stared at it. Not at her face, not at the note. At the fallen thing from her mother's shoe, gleaming on cold stone as if even memory had been stripped from her and placed on display. Lady Nesta whispered, "For heaven's sake, Isolde." Lady Euphemia's voice came again, softer than before and far more poisonous. "Poor Miss Trelawney, even her slippers have lost heart." A laugh began somewhere in the third row. It died before it could become brave. A man had risen from the Ashenford pew. Isolde had seen his Grace Gabriel Ashenford, Duke of Celdon, only twice before that morning, always at a distance, always surrounded by the silence that attended men of unquestioned rank. He was older than Miles by several years, broader in the shoulders, darker in expression, and so controlled that one felt he had never in his life entered a room without first mastering it. He did not hurry now. That made his movement more terrible. Every guest watched him cross the aisle. His coat was black, perfectly cut. His face was still. Only his eyes, fixed first on the gloves and then on Isolde's broken slipper, betrayed the cold precision of a mind already rejecting the explanation society wished to accept. He bent, picked up the silver crescent buckle, and did not hand it to Lady Nesta, nor to the vicar, nor to any man of the family. He took a folded white handkerchief from his breast pocket, placed the buckle upon it, and held it out to Isolde. He did not touch her. He did not force her to take it quickly. He simply waited, as though the entire chapel could wait upon her and not she upon its judgment. Isolde looked at his hand. There was a faint scratch along one edge of the buckle, and in the curve of the crescent, caught where the prong had bent, clung a single pale blue thread. Her mind noticed it absurdly sharply because grief had made room for detail. Pale blue. Lady Euphemia wore pale blue, but Isolde did not yet understand what that meant. She only knew that the Duke of Celdon had stooped before witnesses to retrieve what everyone else had allowed to fall. She reached for it. Her gloved fingers brushed the edge of the handkerchief, not his skin, yet the nearness steadied her more than Lady Nesta's grip ever could have done. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said, and was relieved that her voice did not break. Gabriel inclined his head. "It is yours," he said. "No one else has the right to handle it." Something in the chapel shifted. It was not sympathy. Sympathy was cheap and often cruel. This was attention. The Duke straightened and turned toward the altar rail. He picked up Miles's gloves with 2 fingers, as though they were evidence rather than clothing. "Who delivered these?" he asked. The vicar blinked. "A boy, Your Grace, a messenger. He said they came from Lord Miles." "Did you see my brother place them here?" "No, Your Grace." Gabriel looked at the note. "Did anyone?" No one answered. The silence grew uncomfortable. A silence that had first belonged to Isolde now moved toward the people who had enjoyed it. Lady Nesta rose halfway from the pew. "Your Grace, surely this is not the moment for an inquiry. My niece is overcome, and your brother has made his wishes clear. We must all do what we can to prevent further embarrassment." Isolde's hand closed around the handkerchief and buckle. Further embarrassment. As though embarrassment were a stain she had spilled, as though Miles had not poured it over her in front of God, family, and half of Mayfair. Gabriel turned his head toward Lady Nesta, and the slightness of the movement made it colder. "Madam, your niece has not embarrassed this chapel." Lady Nesta flushed. "I only meant that she should express regret for whatever distress has occurred. She will express nothing she does not owe." The words landed cleanly. Isolde felt them before she understood their full force. In one sentence, He had removed the apology from her shoulders. Not gently, not tenderly, with authority. Lady Euphemia lowered her lashes. But Isolde saw the small tightening at the corner of her mouth. Gabriel saw it too. His gaze rested there for a fraction of a second, then returned to the altar. Until my brother's absence is understood, no announcement will be carried from this chapel except the truth. Lord Miles Ashenford failed to appear. Miss Trelawney did not. A murmur rose, quickly smothered. Isolde felt the chapel's eyes return to her, but they no longer had the same power. Her slipper was broken. Her wedding was ruined. Her future had cracked open in public. Yet she was still standing. She lifted her chin beneath the crooked veil and met the Duke's gaze at last. His eyes were grey, not soft, not warm, but unwavering. He looked at her as though she were not a discarded bride, not a family inconvenience, not a story already being shaped for supper tables. He looked at her as though she were a person whose account of the morning mattered. Isolde drew a slow breath. "I will not be made smaller," she said quietly, "because a gentleman has chosen cowardice." The words were not loud, but they travelled. They reached the vicar. They reached Lady Nesta. They reached Euphemia, whose fan stopped moving, and they reached Gabriel Ashenford, Duke of Celdon, who looked from the fallen strap of Isolde's slipper to the 2 clean gloves in his hand, and then to the chapel doors where no fleeing groom had passed. "Close the doors," he said. "No one leaves until my brother's absence is understood." The chapel doors closed with a sound too soft to be called a blow. Yet every person inside seemed to feel the impact. A footman in Celdon livery stood before them, pale but obedient, his back straight against the carved panels, while the murmur of Mayfair's finest families gathered itself into one restless breath. Isolde remained near the altar step with her damaged slipper hidden beneath the fall of her gown, the silver crescent buckle still resting in Gabriel Ashenford's folded handkerchief against her palm. The little object felt heavier now. It was no longer only her mother's keepsake. It had become something witnessed, something removed from the floor before the world could grind it beneath its heel. The Duke of Celdon turned first to the messenger, a narrow-shouldered boy of perhaps 14, who had been found near the vestry, with rain still darkening the brim of his cap. "Who gave you the gloves?" Gabriel asked. His voice did not rise, but it carried to the last pew. "A gentleman's man, your grace," the boy stammered. "Near Brook Street. He said I was to bring them straight here and give them to the vicar." "Did you see Lord Miles Ashenford?" "No, your grace." "Did the man wear Ashenford livery?" The boy swallowed. "No, your grace. Plain coat. Brown." Gabriel looked at the gloves again. They lay now in his other hand, clean white, folded too neatly for panic, and the note. "Same man, your grace." Lady Nesta rose fully from her pew, her face arranged into grief for public consumption. "This is intolerable. Isolde has suffered enough display. Your grace, surely your brother's feelings, however poorly expressed, must be respected. A gentleman does not absent himself from his own wedding without cause. A gentleman does not send gloves to do the work of his honor," Gabriel said. The sentence froze her where she stood. Isolde felt the shock of it move through the room, not because it was loud, but because no one of Gabriel's rank had been expected to name the shame so plainly. Lady Euphemia's fan opened again with a whisper of painted silk. She sat in pale blue, composed as a portrait, her fair hair arranged beneath a bonnet trimmed with tiny white blossoms. "There may be delicate reasons," she said. "One should be charitable when hearts change." Isolde turned then, slowly. Euphemia's eyes met hers for the first time that morning. There was sympathy on her mouth and victory beneath it. "Hearts," Isolde repeated. It was only one word, but Euphemia's fingers tightened around the fan sticks. Gabriel's gaze moved from one woman to the other. He said nothing. Yet Isolde had the unsettling impression that he had stored the moment away. With the gloves, the note, the cut strap, and the pale blue thread caught in silver, Lady Nesta came toward Isolde and seized her wrist with a pressure that looked affectionate from a distance. "You will say nothing more," she whispered through her teeth. "If you have any sense left, you will let me manage this." Isolde looked down at the gloved hand, gripping her. All her life, her aunt had managed poverty, invitations, expectations, explanations. Lady Nesta managed sorrow by turning it into manners, and managed scandal by offering the nearest woman as sacrifice. Isolde drew her wrist free. "No, Aunt." Lady Nesta stared. "What did you say?" "I said no." The chapel seemed to lean closer. Isolde felt heat climb beneath her veil, but her voice steadied as she went on. "I will not apologize for Lord Miles's absence. I will not ask pardon for standing where I was invited to stand. If there is blame to be carried today, it will not be carried in my hands." A small sound escaped someone in the pews, quickly smothered. Gabriel's expression did not change, but the stillness in him altered. It sharpened into something like respect. The vicar looked between them as though the floor had shifted beneath the altar. "Your Grace," he said faintly. "What is to be done?" Gabriel did not answer at once. He looked toward the empty place where Miles should have stood, then at Isolde, not at Lady Nesta, not at Euphemia, at Isolde. "Miss Trelawney," he said, and the formal address protected her more effectively than any tenderness could have done. "My brother has dishonored you before witnesses. He has endangered your name, your family's position, and the standing of my house. I cannot undo what he has done." She held the handkerchief tighter. "No one can." "No," he said, "but I can refuse to let his cowardice become your ruin." Lady Nesta drew in a sharp breath. Euphemia's fan stopped. Gabriel stepped closer, though he kept enough distance for every eye to see that he presumed nothing. The special license was granted for a marriage between Lord Miles Ashenford and Miss Isolde Trelawney. The family consent, the settlements, and the witnesses are assembled. My solicitor will make what must be made orderly afterward. If you consent, and if the vicar finds no obstacle in conscience. I am Gabriel Ashenford, Duke of Celdon. I will marry you now." For a moment the words made no sense. They were too large for the narrow space in which her life had been confined. The elder brother, the Duke, the man whose silence had ruled rooms where Miles's charm merely decorated them. A hiss of disbelief moved through the chapel. Lady Nesta pressed a hand to her breast. "Your Grace, that is impossible." "It is inconvenient," Gabriel replied. "Not impossible." Isolde stared at him. Every instinct, trained into her by birth and dependence, warned her to accept before he reconsidered. Every wounded part of her recoiled from becoming an emergency, mended for another family's pride. "Why?" she asked. The question was quiet, but Gabriel heard it. He looked almost relieved that she had asked. "Because my brother left you to be devoured by opinion. That is reason for protection, not marriage. In this room today, society will not separate the two easily." "And your house?" she asked. "Would this protect me, or protect Celdon?" For the first time, something like pain crossed his face. It was gone almost at once, but Isolde saw it. So did perhaps no one else. "Both," he said. "I will not insult you by pretending otherwise. But if you refuse, I will still have it known that you were wronged, not rejected for cause. I will still place the weight of my name against any person who claims otherwise." The answer steadied her because it was not pretty. He was not offering romance. He was not offering rescue wrapped in lies. He was offering a hard truth with a door inside it. "And if I accept," she asked, "then you become Duchess of Celdon before every witness who came to watch you shamed. You will have your own rooms, your own maid, your own household authority, and my word that no demand will be made of you beyond what you freely choose." Colour rose in Lady Nesta's cheeks. "Isolde, you cannot stand here bargaining with a duke." Gabriel did not look away from Isolde. "She can." Those two words changed the air more than the offer itself. Isolde felt them enter her like breath after a long submersion. She could bargain, she could ask, she could choose. Euphemia laughed softly, though it came out strained. "How noble, Your Grace, though some might say Miss Trelawney has done very well by being abandoned." Gabriel turned on her then, and the full force of ducal attention fell like winter glass. "Some might say many foolish things, Lady Euphemia. I advise them to begin choosing carefully." Euphemia lowered her gaze. Isolde looked again at the silver crescent in her hand. Her mother had walked into marriage with hope. Isolde would walk into this one with clarity, which was, perhaps, less sweet, but more durable. She thought of Miles's empty place. Lady Nesta's command to apologize, the laugh that had nearly risen when her slipper broke. She thought of Gabriel, stooping to retrieve what had fallen. Not as a lover, not as a savior, but as a witness who had refused to let the room decide her worth. "I will not be passed from one brother to another, as though I were part of the settlement," she said. "No," Gabriel answered, "you will not. I will not have pity mistaken for honor, nor will I, and you will not ask me to pretend this is love." His eyes held hers. "I do not call duty love. If love ever comes, it must arrive honestly, or not at all." The ache in her chest shifted. It did not disappear. It made room. Isolde placed the handkerchief and buckle against her heart for one brief second, then lowered her hand. "Then I choose not to be left behind." The words travelled through the chapel with a force no sob could have carried. The vicar shut his prayer book, opened it again with shaking fingers, and looked at Gabriel. "Your Grace, if both parties freely consent before these witnesses, I will proceed." Gabriel inclined his head. Then, before he stepped into Miles's abandoned place, he turned to the chapel. "Let every person present understand what is happening. Miss Trelawney has not begged, schemed, or apologized. She has been offered a choice, and she has answered it." Isolde moved toward the altar. Her damaged slipper dragged slightly, but she did not stumble. Gabriel noticed. Without touching her, he shifted his stance so his body shielded the uneven step from the eager eyes behind them. It was a small act. It was also the first kind thing that morning which had cost her nothing. Lady Euphemia's fan trembled once. Lady Nesta sat down as though her knees had failed. The vicar began the words again, this time with the Duke of Celdon standing where his brother should have been. Isolde held the silver crescent buckle in her palm throughout the vows. When Gabriel spoke, his voice was steady, grave, and without ornament. When it was Isolde's turn, she did not think of Miles. She thought of the closed doors, the watching room, the man beside her who had not asked her to shrink. "I will," she said, and somewhere behind her, carefully hidden beneath the rustle of silk and scandal, Lady Euphemia Larkspur drew a breath that sounded very much like defeat. By the time the carriage reached Celdon House, the sun had already begun to lower behind the pale stone fronts of Mayfair. and London had learned to whisper faster than horses could travel. Isolde sat opposite the man who was now her husband, with the damaged bridal slipper drawn carefully beneath her gown and her mother's silver crescent buckle, wrapped in the Duke's white handkerchief upon her lap. The vows were scarcely an hour behind them. The chapel still seemed to cling to her veil, to her gloves, to the tightness in her throat. She could still hear the vicar's voice changing from shock to solemnity. She could still hear Lady Nesta breathing, as if every word Isolde spoke had been a social error. She could still see Lady Euphemia Larkspur's pale blue silk in the side pew, too serene for innocence. Across from her, Gabriel Ashenford did not speak merely to fill the silence. That, more than anything, unsettled her. Miles had always talked, when he wished to be forgiven before asking pardon, when he wished to charm before being questioned, when he wished to turn attention away from whatever lay nearest the truth. Gabriel allowed silence to remain until it revealed the shape of things. He held Miles's white gloves in one hand, folded now inside a square of paper taken from the chapel vestry. The note had been placed in his inner coat pocket. Nothing had been lost. Nothing had been explained. "Your Grace," Isolde said at last, because the title now belonged in her mouth and yet felt strange there. His eyes lifted to hers. "You may call me Celdon before others if it eases the formality. In private, Gabriel will do, but only if you wish it." The carefulness of that answer touched an ache she did not want him to see. "I meant to ask what happens now." "Now," he said, "you come to my house as Duchess of Celdon. You are received as such. You are given rooms of your own, a maid of your own if you do not already have, one you trust, and every servant below my roof understands before nightfall that disrespect toward you is disrespect toward me. That sounds like a proclamation. It will be one. And after proclamations," he looked down at the gloves, "after that, I find my brother." A small chill moved through her, not fear for Miles, something harder to name. "Do you believe he ran?" "I believe he wanted the chapel to believe he ran." The answer turned the air inside the carriage colder. Isolde looked at the paper-wrapped gloves. "That is not the same thing." "No. And do you believe he meant to humiliate me?" Gabriel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I believe Miles has often failed to consider the cost of his choices once someone else was available to pay it." It was not an answer, but it was honest enough to wound. Isolde turned her face toward the window. A flower seller stood near the corner, gathering wilted stems into a basket. Beyond her, a pair of ladies looked toward the Celdon carriage and leaned close together. Already the world had begun making a meal of her. Celdon House stood in Grosvenor Square with the grave confidence of inherited stone. Its pillars were clean, its steps broad, its door black enough to reflect the carriage lamps. A butler opened it before Gabriel's hand touched the knocker. Behind him, servants had gathered in disciplined ranks. Not a crowd, not quite, but enough faces to make Isolde's heart tighten. She stepped down before Gabriel could offer aid, because one stumble had been enough for one day. Her damaged slipper shifted beneath her, and pain sparked along the side of her foot. She kept standing. Gabriel noticed. He noticed everything. "Mrs. Vale," he said to a composed woman in dark silk near the foot of the stairs, "Her Grace has had a trying morning. She is not to be questioned. She is not to be observed as novelty. She is Duchess of Celdon, and I expect this house to remember its honor by remembering hers." The housekeeper curtsied deeply. "Yes, Your Grace." The butler bowed. "Your Grace," he said to Isolde, and the title passed through the hall like a candle being lit. One by one, the servants bent or curtsied. Isolde had been Miss Trelawney that morning, a gentlewoman with careful hems and diminishing prospects. Now a footman lowered his eyes because she had become one of the highest-ranking ladies in England. The absurdity of it might have made her laugh if laughter had not felt too near tears. "Thank you," she said, because dignity need not be unkind. Mrs. Vale's expression softened by a fraction. Gabriel turned to the housekeeper. "The east apartments are to be opened." A pause moved through the servants, small but real. "The Duchess's apartments, Your Grace?" "Yes." Isolde looked at him quickly. The Duchess's apartments, not a borrowed guest room, not a temporary chamber tucked away until the family decided what she meant. Gabriel continued, "Have a fire lit. Send warm water. Find a maid with steady hands, unless Her Grace wishes to appoint one from her own household. Send tea, broth, and whatever can be prepared without fuss. Then, after a beat, no sugared sympathy. She has had enough sweetness from people who meant her harm." Mrs. Vale curtsied again. "At once, Your Grace." Isolde should have found the remark severe. Instead, it nearly undid her, not because it was tender. It was not. It was practical, exact, and oddly protective of something no one else had considered. The exhaustion of being comforted by people who wanted a story more than they wanted her well. Gabriel escorted her only as far as the lower stair. He did not touch her. "I will not come to your rooms unless you send for me," he said. Several servants heard him. That was the point. This marriage was made under public necessity. What it becomes in private will not be decided by necessity. Heat rose behind Isolde's eyes, sharper than before. She lowered them quickly to the handkerchief in her hands. "You make boundaries sound like commands. I have had more practice commanding than asking. And yet you asked at the altar. Because there are some doors a man has no honor opening for a woman. She must open them herself." She looked up then. His face remained controlled, but there was fatigue beneath the control. Not softness, not yet. Something human, buried under rank. "Then I will ask something now," she said. "The gloves, the note, and my slipper, do not let them disappear into family discretion. They will not. Not even to spare your brother, especially not to spare my brother." The answer came too quickly to be false. It did not make her safe, but it gave her a place to stand. Isolde unwrapped the handkerchief just enough to see the crescent buckle gleam against the white linen. The pale blue thread still clung to it. "And this?" she asked. "Keep it," Gabriel said. "It is yours. It may be evidence. It is still yours." There it was again, that strange refusal to take what other people would have claimed in the name of managing matters. Isolde folded the handkerchief closed. "Then I will keep it where I can find it." Upstairs, the east apartments smelled faintly of lavender, wood polish, and air long undisturbed. The rooms were grand without being gaudy, with tall windows, pale blue curtains, a writing desk near the fire, and a bed so large it seemed meant for another species of woman, someone born to occupy space without apology. Mrs. Vale assigned a quiet maid named Hannah to assist temporarily. Isolde dismissed the veil first, then the gown's outer train. Then, sitting on the edge of a chair near the dressing table, she lifted her left foot and saw the damage clearly. The strap had not frayed. It had parted in a clean, narrow line. She touched the cut with one finger and felt the delayed horror of it. Someone had wanted her to stumble. Not metaphorically, not socially, bodily, visibly, at the precise instant everyone watched. Her breath caught, but she did not cry while Hannah knelt nearby. "Your Grace?" the maid asked gently. "Shall I send for Mrs. Vale?" "No." Isolde removed the silver crescent buckle from the handkerchief and placed it in the small rosewood dressing box Hannah had found for her. She set it on a folded linen square, scratch upward, pale blue thread still caught in its prong. "Leave that as it is." "Yes, Your Grace." The title still struck like a bell heard through fog. When Hannah withdrew to fetch warm water, Isolde sat alone in the room that was now hers. Her reflection looked back from the mirror, hair loosened, veil gone, face pale, eyes too dry. Duchess of Celdon, wife to Gabriel Ashenford, abandoned by Miles, watched by Euphemia, managed by Lady Nesta, chosen, perhaps, by necessity. She pressed her hands flat against the dressing table until they stopped trembling. Then, at last, the tears came. They were silent and hot and humiliating in their own way, but they were hers, not for Miles, not for love lost. Because she was no longer certain love had ever been present, she wept for the chapel's eyes, for the laugh that had almost risen, for the apology she had been expected to offer, for the small, clean cut in her slipper strap that proved cruelty could be planned with patience. Below stairs, a footman carried Gabriel's sealed instruction to his solicitor, asking for immediate inquiry into Lord Miles Ashenford's recent debts. In the front hall, the butler turned away a caller already eager for details. And in the east apartments, Isolde closed the lid of the dressing box over the silver crescent buckle, not to hide it, but to keep it safe until the day someone would be made to answer for why it had fallen. A soft knock came at the outer sitting-room door. Hannah returned with a salver, her expression uncertain. "A card, Your Grace. It was delivered just now." Isolde took it. The lettering was graceful, expensive, and perfectly familiar. Lady Euphemia Larkspur requested the honour of calling upon the Duchess of Celdon in the morning. Isolde stared at the name until the last tear cooled on her cheek. Then she set the card beside the rosewood box and understood that the wedding had ended. But the humiliation had not. Morning entered the east apartments of Celdon House with the cautious brightness of a day that knew it had inherited scandal. Isolde had slept little, though she had lain still long enough for Hannah to believe her resting. Every sound beyond the door had seemed sharpened by her new title. The footman's step, the muted voice of Mrs. Vale, the wheels of carriages beyond Grosvenor Square, the faint hush that moved through a great house when servants were determined not to be heard discussing their mistress. On the dressing table, the rosewood box remained closed. Inside it lay her mother's silver crescent buckle, scratched, thread-caught, and no longer innocent. Isolde had woken twice in the dark and nearly opened the box to make certain it had not vanished. That was foolish, she told herself. Yet after a day in which a groom had disappeared, gloves had spoken in his place, and a slipper strap had parted at the exact moment her humiliation reached its height. Foolishness seemed merely another name for caution. Hannah entered at 8 with chocolate, toast, and a note written in a severe, slanting hand. "From His Grace, Your Grace." Isolde took it before the tray was set down. The address read simply, "For the Duchess of Celdon." Not Miss Trelawney, not my wife, Duchess. The word still did not fit her, but it no longer struck like a borrowed cloak. She broke the seal. The message was brief. A shoemaker and modiste had been sent for, not to impose a wardrobe, but to take her instructions. If she wished to receive no one, every card would be declined. If she wished to receive Lady Euphemia Larkspur, Gabriel would remain within call, but not in the room unless summoned. At the bottom, in a line that made her throat tighten despite herself, he had written, "Nothing will be chosen for you today unless you choose it first." Isolde read the line twice. Then she folded the note with great care and placed it beside the chocolate cup. "Hannah," she said, "please open the rosewood box." The maid obeyed. The silver crescent lay on the folded linen where Isolde had left it. The pale blue thread still clung to its bent prong. "Do not touch the thread," Isolde said. "Know your grace, and ask Mrs. Vale whether there is a small packet or paper wrapper in which the buckle may be kept after the shoemaker has seen it. It must not be polished." Hannah glanced at her, curious but too well trained to ask. "Yes, your grace." By 10, the sitting room had become a quiet campaign. Mr. Pelham, the shoemaker, bent over the damaged bridal slipper with the solemn distress of a craftsman shown deliberate cruelty. Madame Renaud, the modiste, stood beside a cascade of fabric samples and spoke in tones so tactful they were almost invisible. Gabriel entered only after Mrs. Vale announced him, and after Isolde gave permission. He stopped just inside the room, the morning light striking one side of his face, and bowed as if she were not the woman he had married in emergency the day before, but a duchess whose threshold mattered. "You sent an army," Isolde said, looking from the silks to the leather samples. "A small one," he replied, "under your command." The answer should have been absurd. It was not. She watched him notice the slipper in Mr. Pelham's hands, the rosewood box, the careful distance Hannah maintained from the buckle. "Mr. Pelham?" Gabriel asked. The shoemaker straightened. "Your grace." The strap did not give way from strain. It has been cut. Cleanly, with a narrow blade. The leather was weakened enough to hold until weight was placed upon the step. Isolde's fingers tightened around the arm of her chair. She had known it. Knowing did not soften hearing. Gabriel's gaze moved to her face, then away again, as though he would not make a spectacle even of his concern. "Can the slipper be repaired?" "It can be made wearable, your grace, but the original strap cannot be trusted." "Then it will be preserved," Isolde said. The three of them looked at her. She felt color rise, but did not retreat. If it was cut, it is not merely a damaged shoe. It is an answer waiting for its question. Gabriel's eyes sharpened, and for the first time since the chapel, something almost warm moved behind the grey. "Then it shall be preserved." Madame Renaud lifted a pair of pale satin samples. "For new evening slippers, your grace, perhaps silver embroidery to match the crescent." Isolde looked at the fabrics and felt the old habit rise in her. Choose what is least costly. Choose what offends no one. Choose what says gratitude, not expectation. Before she could speak, Gabriel said, "Madame, her grace is not being dressed to satisfy a rescue. She is being dressed because she has a household to enter, calls to receive, and a world to face. She will choose according to her own taste." Isolde turned toward him. "And if my taste is expensive, then I shall be relieved to discover you have one." The faint dryness in his voice caught her unprepared. It was not quite humor, but it stood near enough to lighten the air. "You are determined to spoil me into compliance." "No," his answer came at once. "Compliance is cheap. Choice is dearer." Madame Renaud pretended not to hear. Mr. Pelham studied the slipper as though it contained the Psalms. Isolde looked down at the silver samples until their edges blurred. "I am not accustomed to being asked what I prefer." "Then we begin there, with slippers, with anything small enough not to frighten you away from the larger questions." She looked at him then, truly, looked. He was still cold in outline, still controlled, still a man made of rank and restraint, yet his attention did not press upon her. It made room. Isolde selected dove-grey walking slippers with narrow silver piping, cream evening slippers with no ornament, but a small crescent worked near the heel, and a practical pair of half boots for wet pavements that made Madame Renaud look briefly pained and Gabriel look briefly approving. For gowns, she chose blue-grey, soft lavender, and a deep green that Hannah said made her eyes steadier. Gabriel said nothing about beauty. He did not flatter. But when Madame suggested a shade of white too bridal to be kind, he said, "Not that one," before Isolde could find the breath to refuse. She should have resented the interference. Instead, she heard what lay beneath it. Not that wound again. Before noon, the samples were cleared, the slipper strap wrapped, and the buckle placed in a paper packet beside the rosewood box. Then Lady Euphemia Larkspur arrived. Her card came first, carried by a footman whose expression remained obediently blank. Isolde looked at it, then at Gabriel, who had been standing near the mantel with a solicitor's note unopened in his hand. "I will receive her," she said. "You are not obliged." "No, that is why I will." He inclined his head. "I shall be in the library. If you ring, I will come. And if I do not, then I will trust you know your own room." The words settled between them with more force than any vow. When Euphemia entered, she brought the faint scent of violets and the polished sorrow of a woman delighted by misfortune she could call tragic. Her gown was pale blue again, though darker than the chapel silk, and Isolde saw Gabriel's gaze pass once over the colour before he withdrew. Euphemia curtsied with exquisite correctness. "Your Grace, how strange and wonderful to call you so." "Strange, certainly," Isolde said. "Wonderful remains under consideration." Euphemia blinked, then smiled. "I came only to express concern. Yesterday must have been a terrible trial. Poor Lord Miles was always so sensitive. A man can be driven into panic when he senses that a lady's hopes have attached themselves elsewhere." Isolde set her teacup down. "Elsewhere? Forgive me, I speak too plainly." "You speak very carefully." A pause opened. Euphemia glanced toward the small table where the paper packet lay beside the rosewood box. How wise to put away yesterday's little mishaps. The gloves on the altar, the slipper on the step. Such details become ugly when people repeat them. Isolde's skin went cold. At the chapel, Euphemia had sat in the side pew. From there she could have seen the gloves. Yes, once everyone saw them, but the slipper had broken beneath Isolde's gown, close to the altar step, shielded almost at once by Gabriel's body. Euphemia should not have known exactly where it happened. Isolde lifted her eyes. "I do not recall telling you the slipper broke on the step." Euphemia's smile held, but its edges thinned. "My dear Duchess, everyone saw." "Did they?" The silence that followed was brief, but it had teeth. Euphemia rose sooner than courtesy required, murmuring that she had other calls. When she left, the room seemed cleaner for her absence and more dangerous for what she had revealed. Isolde waited until the door closed. Then she crossed to the bell and rang once. Gabriel entered less than a minute later, not hurried, but near enough that he must have been waiting in the corridor beyond the library door. "You rang?" he asked. Isolde pointed to the rosewood box and the paper packet beside it. "Lady Euphemia knew the gloves were on the altar and that my slipper broke on the step." Gabriel's face became very still. "Did she?" She claimed everyone saw. Everyone did not. He turned toward the hall and called for the footman with quiet authority. "Find out who placed the groom's gloves in the chapel," he said. "Begin with every servant who stood near the vestry door, every hired messenger, and every carriage seen waiting on Brook Street." Then he looked back at Isolde, and the coldness in him no longer felt like distance. It felt like a blade being drawn in her defense. "Your Grace," he said, softer than before. I believe your first morning as Duchess of Celdon has just become useful. Isolde rested her hand lightly on the rosewood box. For the first time since the altar, she did not feel like the woman left behind. She felt like the woman someone had underestimated. By the third morning of her marriage, Isolde had learned that scandal did not knock at the door like an honest visitor. It seeped beneath thresholds, rode in on calling cards, folded itself into gossip sheets, and arrived at breakfast disguised as concern. Celdon House had become very quiet, but it was not the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of a household listening for the next blow. On the silver tray beside Gabriel's untouched coffee lay 3 newspapers, 2 notes from patronesses who had never before remembered Isolde's existence, and 1 folded sheet from Mr. Vale, the Duke's solicitor, sealed in dark red wax. Gabriel read that one first. Isolde watched from the opposite side of the breakfast table, her left foot resting carefully beneath her gown. The damaged bridal slipper had been wrapped and removed to the small locked cabinet Gabriel had ordered. Placed in her sitting room, her mother's silver crescent buckle remained in the rosewood box, unpolished, the pale blue thread untouched. Nothing had vanished, nothing had yet been explained. Gabriel's face did not change as he read, but the room seemed to grow colder around him. Miles's debts are worse than I was told, he said. Isolde set down her cup. Worse than you knew, or worse than he allowed you to know? Both. Then he has practiced deception in more than one direction. Gabriel looked up, and for a moment she thought he might object to the sharpness of her judgment. He did not. Yes, the single word carried more fatigue than anger. It made him seem older, not by years, but by responsibility repeated, until it had worn grooves into him. Mr. Vale has traced 2 recent notes of obligation to a private gaming establishment off St. James's, the Argent Rooms. A club? Not properly. A place where gentlemen go when they do not wish proper clubs to remember what they owe. Isolde looked toward the newspapers, and Miles went there often? Often enough. Gabriel folded the solicitor's letter with exact care. There is also mention of a wager made 3 nights before the wedding. The wording is unclear. Mr. Vale could not obtain the ledger. Not yet. What kind of wager? The note references a chapel bride. The words entered the room and extinguished whatever warmth remained in the fire. Isolde stared at him. There were moments when humiliation seemed a thing one had survived, a room one had left behind. Then a phrase could open the door again and show that other people had been laughing before she even knew there was a joke. A chapel bride, she repeated. Gabriel's hand closed over the letter. It may not refer to you. How many brides were abandoned in a Mayfair chapel this week? He said nothing. She appreciated that more than comfort. Comfort would have been an insult just then. I wish to speak with Mr. Vale. He is expecting me at noon. Then he may expect us both. Gabriel's gaze lifted. Isolde. It was the first time he had used her given name without urgency or ceremony. The sound of it in his voice unsettled her more than she wished to show. If you are about to tell me this is not fit for me to hear, she said, choose another sentence. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not amusement exactly, but an acknowledgement that she had struck true. I was going to say it. Will be ugly. Yesterday was ugly. This may be uglier. Then I should like to know the shape of it before it is used against me. He leaned back slightly, studying her as though the answer mattered beyond the matter at hand. Very well. We go together, Mr. Vale's chambers stood in Lincoln's Inn, sober, narrow, and crowded with the smell of ink, vellum, and rain-darkened wool from men who had arrived before them. Gabriel's carriage drew more attention than Isolde would have liked, but his presence beside her altered the nature of every stare. No one looked at her as an abandoned woman when the Duke of Celdon handed her down from the carriage with formal care and then stepped aside. Rather than closing his hand around her elbow, he offered his arm only after her feet were steady on the pavement. The gesture was small, precise, and public. A choice, not a claim. Isolde looked at his sleeve, at the black wool stretched over his forearm, and remembered the chapel step, the gloved hand that had returned her buckle without presumption. She placed her hand lightly on his arm. "Thank you," she said, "for the arm or the patience, for understanding there is a difference." His eyes met hers briefly. "I am learning." That answer followed her up the steps more closely than his body did. Mr. Vale was a thin man with silver spectacles and the expression of someone who had spent 30 years watching families pretend money was less vulgar than emotion. He bowed deeply to Isolde. "Your Grace." She still felt the title strike, but now she held it. "Mr. Vale." Gabriel did not sit until she had taken the chair nearest the desk. That too, Mr. Vale noticed. He opened a leather folio and removed a sheet covered in neat notes. "The Argent Rooms keep private ledgers, Your Grace, not easily obtained, even by men who value the Duke of Celdon's displeasure. However, a porter employed there spoke with my clerk under circumstances that encouraged honesty." "How expensive was his honesty?" Gabriel asked. "Moderately." Mr. Vale adjusted his spectacles. He recalls Lord Miles Ashenford attending the rooms on several occasions. 3 nights before the wedding, there was laughter over a wager concerning a bride and a brother. The phrase reported was, and I apologize to Her Grace for repeating it, "The elder Duke will clean up the younger one's bride." For a moment, Isolde heard nothing but the faint scratch of a quill in the adjoining room. Not the street, not the fire, not Gabriel's breath. The sentence was so contemptible that it should have shattered upon being spoken. Instead, it sat on the desk like something men had found clever after wine. "They said that before I knew I was to be ruined," she said. Mr. Vale's face softened with professional restraint. "So it appears, Your Grace." Gabriel rose so abruptly that the chair shifted behind him. He did not strike the desk. He did not swear. The restraint was somehow more frightening. Names. The porter heard Lord Miles addressed directly. He also heard initials, not a full name, E.L. Isolde looked at Gabriel. He was already looking at her. Euphemia Larkspur. Neither of them said it. They did not need to. "Could E.L. be someone else?" she asked. Mr. Vale hesitated. "In London, initials are slippery things. And truth, less slippery when properly cornered." Gabriel turned to the window, his shoulders rigid beneath the severe black coat. "Did the porter mention my name?" Mr. Vale looked down at his notes. "Only in the crude phrase I repeated. He did not say Your Grace was present. He did not say Your Grace had knowledge of the wager. But society will not require proof before enjoying the possibility." Isolde heard the bitterness beneath Gabriel's control and understood, suddenly, that his name could protect her and endanger her at the same time. If the wager suggested he had been expected to marry her, their vows could be twisted into complicity. Her rescue could be made another humiliation. "Where is the original ledger?" she asked. Mr. Vale looked mildly surprised to be addressed so directly, then inclined his head. "Locked at the Argent Rooms. The steward will not release it. He may allow inspection if pressed by sufficient rank." Gabriel turned back. "Then he will be pressed." "Not by you alone," Isolde said. Both men looked at her. She folded her hands in her lap to keep them still. If my name is in that ledger or hidden inside a joke within it, I will not be represented only by men discussing how best to spare me distress. I have had enough of being spared until the knife is already in my back. Mr. Vale lowered his eyes, perhaps to hide approval. Gabriel's expression was unreadable. "You are right," he said. The simplicity of it did more to unsteady her than resistance would have done. "We will seek inspection together. And if the ledger proves Miles made sport of me, then we make certain the gentleman who laughed learn how expensive laughter can become." Isolde rose. "Then we shall see whether gentlemen laugh as bravely when their names are read aloud." Mr. Vale carefully closed the folio, but before he could speak, a clerk entered with a folded paper in his hand. "Forgive me, sir. This was brought to Lady Nesta Trelawney's house less than an hour ago, then sent on when the servant learned." Their graces were here. Gabriel took the paper. It was not sealed. He opened it, read once, and went very still. Isolde did not wait for permission. "What is it?" He held it out to her. The page was ruled like a ledger extract, copied in a clerkish hand, with one phrase standing out like ink spilled across her life: "The chapel bride to fall to Celdon." Beneath it, in darker ink, someone had added Gabriel's title. His Grace expected to claim the lady. Isolde looked from the page to Gabriel's face. For the first time since the altar, she saw not certainty there, but danger. Not danger from him. Danger approaching them both. "That is not merely a wager," she said. "No," Gabriel answered, his voice low. "It is a trap." The copied page did not leave Isolde's mind, even after Mr. Vale locked it in his folio, and Gabriel ordered a certified note made of every hand through which it had passed. By the 6th day of her marriage, the phrase had taken up residence behind her ribs like a splinter. The chapel bride to fall to Celdon. Fall. Not marry, not choose. Fall, as though she had been a card played badly, a wager lost, a woman tipped from one brother's hand into another's. Celdon House had begun to treat her with the solemn deference due a duchess. Yet she could feel London beyond the windows sharpening its appetite. Every carriage wheel in Grosvenor Square sounded like gossip arriving. Every calling card became a little white threat. That afternoon, Mrs. Vale showed Mr. Pelham into the small sitting room of the East Apartments, where Isolde had asked that the damaged bridal slipper be brought from the locked cabinet. Hannah stood near the door with her sewing basket, more chaperone than maid, though she pretended to sort ribbons. Gabriel entered last, only after Isolde had sent permission. He bowed, glanced once at the rosewood box on the table, and then at the slipper lying upon a square of linen. "You are certain you wish to be present?" he asked. Isolde looked at the slipper. Its satin was still clean in places, still delicate, still absurdly bridal. The broken strap lay limp across the side, no longer able to pretend accident. "I was present when it broke," she said. "I would rather be present when it speaks." Mr. Pelham cleared his throat with the melancholy dignity of a man forced to accuse craftsmanship of a crime it had not committed. "Your Grace," I examined the strap in my shop with a stronger lens. "I can confirm what I suspected. The cut was made before the ceremony. Very fine blade. The leather was weakened from beneath, just enough that it would hold while her Grace walked the aisle, but fail when weight was placed upon the chapel step." A silence followed. Isolde did not flinch, though the memory passed through her body with dreadful precision. The step, the snap, the gasp, the silver crescent striking stone. Someone had not merely wanted her abandoned. Someone had wanted the chapel to see her falter. Gabriel's hand closed slowly around the back of a chair. Could it have been done while the slipper was on her foot? Unlikely, Your Grace. Mr. Pelham touched the strap with one careful finger. More likely while the slippers were waiting before she dressed, or while someone had reason to handle the hem of her gown. My aunt's maid fastened my slippers, Isolde said, but she was watched by Hannah. Hannah looked up quickly. Yes, Your Grace, I was there. Lady Nestor's maid complained the room was crowded, but she did not have the slippers alone. Who else was near them? Gabriel asked. Isolde thought back to the dressing room at Lady Nestor's house. Her veil hung over the chair. Her bouquet waited in water. Two maids, Lady Nestor, a seamstress sent to adjust the hem, and for one brief moment, Lady Euphemia Larkspur at the doorway, smiling and saying she had come to wish the bride composure. She had not touched the slippers. Isolde was almost certain, almost. Lady Euphemia came to the door, she said. She did not enter far. How far? Gabriel asked. Not sharply, precisely. Far enough to stand near the chair where my gown was laid. Mr. Pelham drew the silver crescent buckle from its paper packet. Isolde had allowed him to examine it only in the room and only over a linen cloth. The little buckle looked smaller in daylight, yet more important. It bore the scratch she had noticed in the chapel, and in the bent prong, the pale blue thread still clung, like a secret that had not known how to escape. Mr. Pelham lifted his lens. There is a caught fibre here, silk, I think, pale blue. Not from the slipper. The stitching on her Grace's shoe is white silk, and the gown thread is ivory. Gabriel looked at Isolde, and neither of them spoke Euphemia's name. Speaking, it would have made the thought too easy. Proof had to be harder than suspicion. Isolde leaned closer. The buckle lay between them, the silver crescent, once her mother's quiet talisman, now bore the first visible sign that a person with pale blue silk had been close enough to the damage for a thread to catch. May I? Gabriel asked, reaching toward the buckle. It is still yours. The reminder was unnecessary and necessary at once. Isolde nodded. You may. His fingers approached the silver at the same moment hers did. She had meant only to turn the buckle toward the light. He had meant, perhaps, to steady the linen. Their hands met over the crescent. Not fully. Only the brush of his fingertips against the edge of her glove. Yet the room changed. The fire snapped softly. Hannah lowered her eyes to the ribbon basket. Mr. Pelham discovered sudden fascination in his lens. Gabriel did not seize her hand. He did not withdraw as if she had burned him. He stilled, and in that stillness, Isolde felt the weight of everything he did not presume. The chapel had taken choice from her so quickly that this single paused second seemed almost dangerous in its gentleness. She drew back first, not from dislike, but because something in her had woken too soon and too quietly to be trusted. Gabriel lifted his hand a moment later. Forgive me, he said. There is nothing to forgive. Her voice was steadier than her pulse. Mr. Pelham wrapped the strap and buckle separately under Gabriel's direction, though the buckle remained formally in Isolde's possession until it would be required. Once the shoemaker withdrew, Hannah followed with the tray, leaving the door open, proper and reassuring. Gabriel remained by the table, looking down at the slipper. Miles has always resented being second, he said. Isolde looked at him. The confession had not been asked for. That made it more revealing. To you, to duty, to consequence, to any room where charm could not outrank responsibility. He touched the back of the chair, then let his hand fall. My father excused him when he was young. My mother wept over him. I paid debts when they became dangerous. I told myself I was protecting the family. Were you? Sometimes. His mouth tightened. Sometimes I was teaching him that another man's honor could be spent after his own was gone. The severity in his voice was not directed at Miles alone. Isolde understood that before he said more. You think yesterday was the bill coming due? I think you were made to pay what was owed by men who never imagined you would be allowed to count the cost. He looked at her then, and the anger in his eyes was colder than shouting would have been. But you are not a mistake I must repair, Isolde. You are not an Ashenford inconvenience. You are my wife, and you were wronged before you ever stood beside me. His wife. The words had been spoken before, by the vicar, by servants, by Lady Euphemia, with poisoned sweetness. Yet from Gabriel they sounded less like possession than acknowledgement. Isolde turned toward the rosewood box, now empty except for the linen on which the buckle usually rested. If Miles did this because he resented you, then perhaps marrying me was only another way for him to strike at you. Perhaps, and perhaps Euphemia wished him to. Perhaps you are very fond of that word. It keeps men from mistaking suspicion for truth. And women, he met her gaze. It keeps women from being condemned by men who enjoy certainty too quickly. That answer entered her quietly. She thought of the chapel, of Lady Nesta urging apology, of Euphemia's careful cruelty, of the copied ledger page waiting in Mr. Vale's folio. Then we need more than a thread. Yes. A footman appeared at the open door and bowed. Your Grace, a message from Mr. Vale. Gabriel took it, broke the seal, and read. His expression hardened with each line. What is it? Isolde asked. He looked from the letter to the slipper, then to her. A loose copy of the betting page has begun circulating. Mr. Vale believes it has already reached 2 drawing rooms and 1 card party invitation list. Isolde felt the blood leave her fingers. With your name added? Yes. The trap was no longer waiting in paper. It was moving through London, carried by hands that would pretend shock while enjoying every word. She pressed her palm flat against the table beside the empty rosewood box. Then they do not only mean to say I was wagered away. No, Gabriel said. They mean to say I was waiting to collect you. Isolde looked toward the wrapped slipper strap, the silver buckle packet, and the pale blue thread that might yet speak if protected long enough. Fear rose, but beneath it came something sharper. Then we had better reach the truth before their lie learns to walk faster than we do. Gabriel folded Mr. Vale's note. We will. And this time, when he said we, Isolde believed he knew the word included her. Lady Larkspur's card evening glittered with the sort of elegance that made cruelty look like entertainment. By the 8th night of Isolde's marriage, the loose-copied page had already moved through Mayfair with a speed no decent truth could hope to match. It had been folded into reticules, whispered over chocolate, mentioned behind fans at morning calls, and denied so often that everyone knew precisely what was being denied. Gabriel had advised caution before accepting Lady Larkspur's invitation, but he had not forbidden it. That mattered. He had stood in the east sitting room of Celdon House while Hannah fastened Isolde's new dove-grey evening slippers, and when Isolde said she would rather enter the room where the rumour had teeth than wait politely for it to bite from a distance, he had only asked, "Do you wish me beside you or behind you?" She had looked at him then, surprised by the choice. Beside me. Then beside you is where I shall be. Now, as their names were announced in Lady Larkspur's crimson drawing-room, Isolde felt the full force of that answer. The room did not fall silent all at once. Silence would have been too honest. Instead, conversation thinned strand by strand. A laugh ended too soon. A card dropped softly onto green baize. A gentleman near the mantel turned his glass without drinking. Lady Euphemia Larkspur stood near her mother's chair in pale blue silk, the same colour family as the thread caught in Isolde's silver buckle, though tonight her gown was trimmed with white satin bows that gave her the appearance of innocence, carefully purchased. Isolde entered on Gabriel's arm. The touch was formal, permitted, visible. It had begun outside the carriage when he offered his sleeve without closing his hand over hers. She had accepted because refusal would have been a lie. His presence steadied her, but it did not own her. That distinction had become the narrow bridge on which her trust still stood. Lady Larkspur swept forward with practiced warmth. "Your Grace, Duchess, how very brave of you to come." "How very curious of you to call it bravery," Isolde replied. Lady Larkspur's smile paused before it resumed. Gabriel said nothing, and that silence was more effective than a rebuke. He guided Isolde no farther than the center of the room, then allowed her to decide whether to sit or stand. She chose to stand. She would not be arranged like a fragile ornament at the edge of a table while people discussed the fracture lines. Euphemia approached with a fan of ivory sticks painted in forget-me-nots. "Dear Duchess," she said, "I hope you don't find the evening too taxing. Cards can be rather unforgiving when one has already had a difficult week." "Then I shall avoid poor partners," Isolde said. A flicker crossed Euphemia's face. It vanished almost immediately. Wise, though one does not always know who has been playing in advance. The words were soft enough to be ignored and sharp enough to draw blood. Isolde felt Gabriel still beside her. Across the room, a movement at the doorway drew every eye. Lord Miles Ashenford entered as though he had merely been late for supper, not absent from the ruin he had created. He was beautifully dressed, pale in the candlelight, and smiling with the frayed charm of a man who had discovered that disgrace, when carried lightly, could be mistaken by fools for romance. Isolde had expected anger to rise. Instead, something colder moved through her. Distance. She looked at him and realized that the man she had once agreed to marry had been less a beloved future than a door she had been told to walk through because no better one had opened. Miles bowed. "Your Grace," he said to Gabriel, with a brother's ease and a debtor's caution. Then to Isolde, "Duchess, you look remarkably well." "You look remarkably present," Isolde answered. A soft ripple moved through the room. Miles laughed, but not quickly enough. "I deserved that." "You deserve rather more than that," Gabriel said. His voice was even. Miles' smile tightened, still so severe. "I had thought marriage might soften you. You were not present to observe it." Euphemia stepped between them with the grace of a hostess rescuing conversation from truth. "Gentlemen, please. This is a card evening, not a family tribunal. One may become the other with very little effort," Gabriel said. Lady Larkspur clapped her hands lightly and ordered tables arranged. People moved because movement gave them an excuse to listen. Isolde remained standing near the central table as Euphemia lifted a folded page from a silver tray, almost carelessly, as though it had appeared there by accident. "Since rumor has been so unkind," Euphemia said, "perhaps clarity would serve everyone. A dreadful paper came into Mamma's possession. We intended to destroy it, of course, but then one hears so many versions. It seems unfair to let whispers wound where ink may explain." Gabriel's hand moved slightly toward Isolde's, then stopped. She saw the motion. So did he. The absence of touch became its own confession. He knew something was coming, and he knew he had not told her everything. Euphemia unfolded the page. Isolde recognized the ruled lines before she saw the words. The copied Argent Room's page, the trap from Mr. Vale's office, had grown legs and entered society before the original ledger could be inspected. "No," Gabriel said. It was not loud, but the warning in it was unmistakable. Euphemia looked wounded. "Your Grace, surely if the paper is false, you will wish to say so before your friends. This is not a court." "No," Miles said lightly, moving closer. "It is worse. It is Mayfair." A few people laughed because they were relieved to be permitted. Euphemia read, not loudly, but clearly enough for every hungry ear. "The chapel bride to fall to Celdon." A breath moved through the room. She lowered the page, and below, in a darker hand, His Grace expected to claim the lady. The words struck differently in public. In Mr. Vale's chamber, they had been dangerous. Here, beneath chandeliers and painted ceilings, they became spectacle. Isolde felt the room look first at Gabriel, then at her, then back again with growing delight. The abandoned bride had become something uglier than pitied. She had become suspected. Had she known? Had the Duke known? Had the marriage been rescue, or arrangement, or victory over a younger brother's discarded promise? Miles lifted his glass. "My brother always preferred winning what I lost." The sentence landed with a softness that made it worse. Gabriel stepped forward. "You will retract that." Miles spread one hand. "I'm only repeating what others have already wondered." "Then they may wonder in silence." "Can one command silence, Gabriel? Even as a duke?" Gabriel's face was pale with controlled fury. Isolde looked at him, waiting for the swift denial, the clean explanation, the truth that would put ground back beneath her feet. "You knew of this page?" she asked. He turned to her at once. "Not this page." "That is not what I asked." The room receded. Even Euphemia's satisfied stillness blurred. Isolde saw only Gabriel's face and the brief hesitation before he answered. Brief. "But enough. I knew Miles had been reckless at the Argent Rooms," he said. "I had heard of wagers. I did not know your name was involved." The words were careful. They were likely true. They were not whole enough. "When did you hear of wagers?" He looked as though he wished to spare her the room. That was precisely the injury. "Before Mr. Vale's letter." Isolde felt the cold move from her fingers to her heart. Before. Not the full truth, perhaps, but enough to have told her that her humiliation might have been made into a game before she was invited to fight it. "And you did not tell me." "I did not know it concerned you, but you feared it might." He did not answer quickly enough. There it was. Not guilt for the wager. Something subtler and more painful. Protection turned into omission. Euphemia's eyes gleamed. "How difficult it must be," she murmured, "to discover one has been protected from so much." Gabriel turned on her. "You will not speak to my wife." Isolde looked at him then, and the title that had steadied her days before now cut. "My wife." Spoken in defense. Yes, spoken also before he had answered her. She slipped her hand from his arm. The movement was small, but the room saw it. Of course the room saw it. Rooms like this existed to see pain and call it information. Gabriel's hand lowered slowly to his side. He did not reach again. That restraint saved him from losing more than he already had. Isolde removed the narrow Duchess bracelet he had sent with the Modesty's account. 2 mornings earlier, a delicate thing of silver links chosen, he had said, because it would not weigh upon her wrist. She placed it on the green baize table beside Euphemia's copied page. The little sound it made was clearer than any sob. "Your Grace," Lady Nesta whispered from behind her, horrified. Isolde did not turn. She looked at Gabriel, not Miles, not Euphemia. "When you are ready to give me the whole truth, send for your wife, not your liability. Gabriel's face changed then, not dramatically. The Duke of Celdon would not fall apart before Lady Larkspur's guests. But something in his eyes broke open enough for Isolde to see that he understood the wound, not society's wound. His. He had shielded her publicly and failed her privately. Miles shifted uneasily. Euphemia's fan fluttered too fast. Isolde inclined her head to the room with all the dignity she had left and walked toward the doors. Her new slippers did not falter. Gabriel did not stop her. He only turned to the guests, his voice low and cold enough to still even the boldest whisper. No one in this room will mistake a copied page for proof once I have the original. Then he looked at Miles, and no brother of mine will hide behind laughter much longer. Isolde reached the hall before her breath shook. Behind her, the card room remained bright, warm, and full of watching faces. Ahead waited the dark carriage, the night air, and the terrible knowledge that being protected was not the same as being trusted with the truth. Gabriel did not follow Isolde into the carriage that night. He stood beneath Lady Larkspur's blazing portico while the door closed between them, and for once his restraint did not look like strength. It looked like a sentence he had passed upon himself. Isolde saw him through the carriage window, only briefly. A tall, dark figure held still by rank, guilt, and the watching crowd behind the curtains. Then the horses moved, and London slid past in streaks of lamplight and shuttered windows. Hannah sat opposite her, hands folded, eyes lowered, with the careful mercy of a servant who had seen enough pain to know that silence could be kinder than questions. The Duchess bracelet no longer circled Isolde's wrist. It lay on a card table among hostile witnesses, beside a copied page that had turned her marriage into another public game. Her hand felt strangely bare without it, not lonely, bare, as if she had removed not a gift, but a question. At Celdon House, Mrs. Vale met her in the hall, with worry hidden beneath perfect discipline. Isolde gave only one instruction. If His Grace asks to see me tonight, tell him I will receive a note in the morning. Mrs. Vale curtsied. She did not look shocked. That steadied Isolde more than sympathy would have done. Upstairs, Isolde did not open the rosewood box. She knew what lay inside. The silver crescent buckle, the thread, the scratch, the memory of a chapel floor. She had no wish to hold evidence while her heart felt like another object needing proof. She removed her gloves, sat by the unlit fire, and watched the square of darkness in the window until dawn softened it into grey. Gabriel's note arrived at 9, sealed but unadorned. Hannah brought it on a salver, and Isolde recognized at once the difference between a summons and a request. This was folded like a request. She opened it slowly. The words were few. He asked permission to speak with her in the morning room, with Hannah or Mrs. Vale present if she preferred. He would not enter her apartments. He would not ask forgiveness before giving the whole truth. He would wait upon her answer. Isolde read the note twice, then looked toward Hannah. Tell His Grace I will come down in half an hour. You will remain near the door. Yes, Your Grace. The morning room was pale with cold light when Isolde entered. Gabriel stood near the window, not seated, not comfortable, not pretending last night had been a misunderstanding that could be smoothed flat by authority. He bowed. Thank you for coming. Hannah took a chair near the door with her sewing, close enough to satisfy propriety and far enough to allow honest speech. Isolde remained standing. You said you would give the whole truth. Yes. His voice was rougher than usual, though still controlled. Before Mr. Vale wrote of the chapel bride, I had heard that Miles had been reckless at the Argent Rooms. I had heard of wagers connected to his wedding week. Not your name, not the chapel, not the cruelty of it, but enough that I should have told you the possibility instead of deciding uncertainty was kinder. Isolde held herself very still. Why did you not? Because I have spent years preventing Ashenford's shame from spreading. I told myself I was containing harm. I told myself a rumor without proof would only wound you again. His eyes lifted to hers. That was vanity dressed as protection. The honesty struck harder than any excuse. Isolde had prepared herself for defense, for careful distinctions, for a duke's elegant refusal to be entirely wrong. She had not prepared for him to name the harm before she did. You let me walk into that room with less knowledge than you had. Yes, you let Euphemia place a page before me, while I had to learn from your silence that you had feared something. Yes, his hands remained at his sides. He did not reach for her. I failed you there. The words were plain. No silk, no rank, no command. Isolde looked away first, not because she wished to spare him, but because his accountability gave her anger nowhere easy to stand. Last night, when you said my wife, I hated you for a moment. Gabriel absorbed it without flinching. I deserved that. You said it as if my being yours answered what you had not told me. His jaw tightened. I know. Do you? Yes. I used the truth of our marriage to defend you before giving you the truth of my knowledge. I will not do so again. Silence entered, but it was not the chapel's silence and not the card room's hungry quiet. It was harder, cleaner, a silence in which something might be repaired if neither person rushed to pretend it had not broken. Isolde folded her hands before her. From this morning forward, no decision is to be made in my name without my knowledge. Not for my safety, not for my reputation, not for your house. Agreed, if there is evidence, I see it. Yes, if there is danger, I am told. Yes, if you are afraid, Your Grace, you may say so. You may not turn fear into a locked door and call it kindness. Gabriel's expression shifted, then, the smallest fracture in the severe composure that had carried him through chapels, carriages, and hostile rooms. I am afraid, he said. Isolde had not expected the answer to come so quickly. Of what? Of discovering my brother made a sport of your ruin while I was close enough to prevent some part of it, and too proud to see how much I did not know. He drew one slow breath, and of becoming another man who decides what pain you are permitted to understand. The room seemed to soften around the edges. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something warmer than injury. Isolde turned toward the table where he had laid 2 documents. One was Mr. Vale's neat memorandum. The other was a folded note bearing the mark of the Argent Rooms. What is that? The club's steward has agreed to allow inspection of the original ledger this morning. Not removal, inspection only. Mr. Vale will accompany us, if you still wish to come. She almost smiled at the if he had remembered. I do, then we go together. The Argent Rooms did not announce themselves like a proper club. They hid behind a discreet door off a narrow street near St. James's, where polished brass and drawn curtains suggested privacy more than respectability. Mr. Vale met them there with a clerk, and Hannah accompanied Isolde in the carriage, remaining close enough to keep propriety secure. The steward was a square-faced man with anxious eyes and a watch chain that trembled when Gabriel gave his name. He led them to a private room smelling of wax, ink, and old smoke. The ledger lay on a green baize table. Not the copied page, the original. Isolde felt her pulse steady as she approached it. Here was no whisper, no fan-painted malice, no smile from Euphemia. Here was ink. Ink could lie, but it left habits behind. The steward opened to the marked page. Mr. Vale bent first, then moved aside for Isolde. Gabriel did not crowd her shoulder. He stood beside her, close enough to support, distant enough not to direct her eyes. The original entry was brief: Ashenford minor, chapel bride, fall before vow, stake acknowledged. E.L. present. There was no Gabriel. No, His Grace expected to claim the lady. No suggestion that he had waited to collect what Miles lost. Isolde exhaled carefully. Relief came, but it brought disgust with it. They added your name later, she said. Mr. Vale nodded. The spacing confirms it. The copied page was altered after the original entry was transcribed or imitated. Gabriel looked at the steward. Who requested access to this page? The man hesitated. Gabriel did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Lord Miles Ashenford asked whether a page might be corrected if a gentleman had written foolishly in wine. I refused. The lady's initials had already been entered. E.L. Lady Euphemia Larkspur, Isolde said. The name left her mouth without tremor. The steward swallowed. I could not say, Your Grace. You could, Gabriel said. You will, when called upon properly. The steward's eyes dropped. There is more. A porter was paid to carry gloves to the chapel. He believed it a jest. He has since understood otherwise. Isolde's hand tightened at her side. Gabriel saw, but he did not touch her. Not there, not before strangers, not without being asked. That restraint, after last night, mattered. When they returned to the carriage, the London air felt sharp and damp. Hannah settled opposite them, eyes on her sewing. Mr. Vale remained behind to secure a certified extract and a statement from the steward. For several minutes the carriage moved through the streets without speech. Then Gabriel placed his hand palm up on the seat between them. He did not reach across. He did not speak. He offered. Isolde looked at his hand. Strong, still, open. Yesterday she would have seen only power there. This morning she saw an apology that knew it could not demand to be accepted. Slowly she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed only after hers rested there, gently enough that she could have withdrawn at any moment. She did not. The carriage rolled past shuttered shops and early callers' coaches, carrying them back toward the house where she was still learning whether marriage could become something other than emergency. Gabriel looked down at their joined hands, then out the window, as if he feared too much gratitude would make the moment smaller. I cannot undo last night, he said. No, I can do better than last night. Isolde let the silence answer first. Then she said, begin by never leaving me outside my own truth again. His thumb did not stroke her glove. He made no tender claim. He simply held her hand, as though holding a vow he had not yet earned the right to speak. I won't, he said. And because the original ledger had cleared him of the cruelest lie, because he had named the lesser truth of his failure, because her hand remained free even while held in his, Isolde allowed her fingers to settle more fully into his grasp. By the time Celdon House came into view, she had not forgiven everything, but she had returned to partnership. That was not peace. It was stronger than peace. It was the first honest plank across a dangerous river. As the carriage stopped, a boy from the Argent Rooms ran up, breathless, beside the horses, with a note for the Duke. Gabriel opened it, and the brief warmth in his expression vanished. The steward says Miles has asked for the original ledger page to be destroyed before nightfall. Isolde did not remove her hand at once. Instead, she looked toward the house, then back at Gabriel. Then we know he is frightened. Gabriel folded the note around the danger it carried. Yes, Isolde released his hand only when the footman opened the carriage door. Good, she said. Frightened men make mistakes. The note about the ledger page did not frighten Isolde as Miles might have intended. It clarified him. Men who still possessed power did not scramble to destroy ink before nightfall. They laughed, denied, charmed, and let weaker people exhaust themselves against polished doors. Men who were frightened reached for fire, scissors, locked drawers, and bribed hands. By the next morning, the certified extract from the Argent Rooms had been secured by Mr. Vale, and the original ledger remained under the steward's reluctant guard. Gabriel had sent 2 footmen not to threaten, but to stand witness at the club door until the steward's written statement could be taken. He had told Isolde each step before it was taken. That mattered more than the steps themselves. In the east sitting room of Celdon House, Isolde sat with the copied betting page, Mr. Vale's certified extract, and a sheet of plain paper spread before her. The rosewood box stood near her elbow. Inside it, the silver crescent buckle and the pale blue thread remained wrapped as Mr. Pelham had left them, while the cut bridal slipper strap lay in a separate packet. Nothing had been moved without record. Nothing had been polished into innocence. Gabriel stood near the mantel, reading the club steward's statement aloud once, then again when Isolde asked him to repeat the precise wording. The original entry reads, Ashenford Minor, Chapel Bride, fall before vow, stake acknowledged, E.L. present. He lowered the paper. The copy shown at Lady Larkspur's added my title beneath the line. Not only added it, Isolde said. She leaned closer to the copied page and read it badly. Gabriel crossed the room, then stopped beside the table rather than behind her chair. He had learned not to loom over evidence that concerned her name. What do you see? The clerk who wrote the original ledger abbreviates rank when it appears at all. Lord Miles is not named as Lord Miles. He is Ashenford Minor, careless, almost contemptuous, but here. She touched the air above the darker edition, not the paper itself. His Grace expected to claim the lady. That is not how a gaming clerk writes in a wager book. That is how a drawing-room whispers. Gabriel's eyes sharpened. A social phrase, not a club phrase. Yes, and the ink sits between lines as if the writer needed to make the accusation fit the space left to him. Mr. Vale, who had been seated opposite with his spectacles low on his nose, gave a soft sound that was nearly approval. Your Grace has an excellent eye. I have had practice, Isolde said. Women without money learn to notice when accounts are being made around them. Gabriel looked at her, and something in his face changed, not to pity, but to recognition. She preferred that. There is more, she continued. The copied page says the Chapel Bride to fall to Celdon. Then the added line says His Grace expected to claim the lady. If Gabriel had been party to the wager from the beginning, why not write Celdon directly as the Duke? Why first write Celdon as though it were an event or a house, then later make it a man? Mr. Vale removed his spectacles. Because the first line was copied from the original, and the second was added by someone who wanted readers to understand the cruelest possible meaning. Isolde sat back. Exactly. For a moment no one spoke. The fire made a low sound in the grate. Outside, a carriage rolled past, carrying someone toward another morning call, another morsel of gossip, another room where her name might be chewed fine. Isolde looked at Gabriel. I want to speak with Miles. His stillness became immediate. No, she lifted one brow. He caught himself before the word could harden into command. Forgive me, that was badly said. It was honestly said. It was also old habit. He placed the statement on the table. I do not like the thought of you alone with him, nor do I. That is why I will not be alone. Gabriel waited. Isolde turned to Mr. Vale. If my aunt invites Lord Miles to Lady Nestor's drawing room, under the pretense of discussing a quiet family settlement, could your clerk attend as a witness? Not at the tea table, of course, in the adjoining room, writing an inventory or preparing a memorandum. Mr. Vale's eyes brightened behind his lenses. Entirely possible. And a Celdon footman? Also possible, Gabriel said, slower now because he was forcing himself to follow rather than lead. But Miles may not come if he thinks I am there. Then you will not be in the room. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Isolde softened her voice, not to yield, but to make certain he understood the difference between courage and recklessness. I am not asking to be unprotected. I am asking not to be hidden from the moment that may give us truth. He thinks women are managed by fear, embarrassment, or gratitude. Let him think I am willing to be managed. Gabriel's gaze held hers. And if he insults you, he already made me into a wager. Words will not be a new invention. The flinch in his eyes was brief but visible. She did not regret causing it. Some truths had to be allowed their proper weight. Very well, he said at last. You will have Mr. Vale's clerk in the adjoining room, a Celdon footman within call, and Hannah nearby if propriety requires it. And you? I will be close enough to come if summoned, not close, enough to make him play the wrong part. Isolde touched the edge of the copied page. Then we begin. Lady Nestor received the plan with the horrified delight of a woman who disliked scandal, but adored being essential to its management. By afternoon, her drawing room had been arranged with too much tea, too many cushions, and one nervous footman stationed near the doors under the pretense of moving coal scuttles. Mr. Vale's clerk sat in the adjoining library with the door not quite closed, scratching steadily at papers that required no attention. Hannah remained by the window with her work-bag. Gabriel had left Isolde at the entrance with one final question. Do you still choose this? Yes. He looked at her hand, then at her face. She knew he would not ask for touch, not here, not before she gave it. So, she reached out and placed her gloved fingers briefly against his sleeve, just above the cuff. The gesture was small, almost nothing, yet beneath the wool, she felt the sudden stillness of him. I know where you are, she said, his voice lowered, and I know where you are. Then he stepped away before tenderness could become spectacle. Miles arrived 10 minutes late, carrying charm like a wilted bouquet. He bowed over Lady Nestor's hand, smiled at Isolde as though their last meeting had been a misunderstanding, and accepted tea he did not drink. Duchess, he said, how grand you have become. How absent you became, Isolde replied. Lady Nestor made a faint choking noise into her handkerchief. Miles laughed softly. I suppose I earned that. People keep saying so, yet no one seems eager to pay the debt. His smile thinned. He glanced toward the library door. Isolde poured tea with perfect steadiness. My aunt believes a quiet arrangement may spare everyone further embarrassment. A wise woman, Lady Nestor. I have not agreed that she is wise, only that she believes it. Miles leaned back, irritation showing through the charm now. What do you want, Isolde? Truth. No one wants truth. They want a version they can survive. Then give me yours. For a moment, Miles looked almost young, not innocent, merely tired. I was in debt. To whom? Men who do not wait politely. And Lady Euphemia? His gaze snapped to hers. They're too quick, too revealing. Lady Euphemia is a friend whose initials appeared beside a wager concerning my fall before the vow. Miles set down his cup. You should leave that alone, because it will wound me, because it will not change anything. Isolde looked at him across the tea table. and saw with extraordinary clarity the difference between a weak man and a harmless one. Miles was weak. He was not harmless. It has already changed everything. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Withdraw from this chase. Let the gossip fade. Gabriel will bury it if you ask sweetly enough. I can persuade certain parties to say the page was nonsense, provided you do not force names into public. And what do you receive for such generosity, peace? No, Isolde said. Debt relief. His face changed. Only for a second, but the mask slipped. In the library, Mr. Vale's clerk continued writing. Near the door, the footman did not move. Miles recovered badly. You have become sharp since marrying my brother. No, I was always sharp. You simply preferred me sheathed. The silence that followed was worth every cruel whisper she had endured. Miles rose too quickly. If you drag Euphemia into this, you will not like what society says of a bride who married one brother before the other's gloves were cold on the altar. Society has already said it. Isolde stood as well. Now it may hear why. Miles looked toward the hall, perhaps realizing too late that the room had ears. You cannot prove anything. Perhaps not today. She let her gaze rest on him until his own wavered. But frightened men make mistakes. You taught me that. He left without finishing his tea. Lady Nesta collapsed into a chair with a whisper of outrage. But Isolde did not listen. She crossed to the adjoining library. Mr. Vale's clerk rose, pale and triumphant, his notes covered in Miles' own words. Gabriel stood beyond the far doorway, where he had waited without entering. When their eyes met, he did not ask if she was hurt. He knew she was. He asked the better question. Did he give you enough? Isolde looked back toward the abandoned teacup, the chair pushed out of place, and the path Miles had taken out of yet another room where he had tried to leave her with the consequence. Enough to know I was never unwanted, she said, only used. Gabriel's face darkened, but he did not speak over the moment, and for once the silence belonged entirely to her. The clerk's notes from Lady Nesta's drawing room changed the weather inside Celdon House. Nothing outside had altered. Carriages still rolled through Grosvenor Square. Footmen still carried silver trays. Callers still left cards with phrases of concern, so polished they reflected nothing sincere. Yet beneath the disciplined surface of the Duke's house, everything had tightened around one dangerous fact. Miles had not merely run. He had been paid, flattered, and cornered into running by people who believed Isolde's humiliation could be settled afterward like a gaming debt. By the 12th day of her marriage, Mr. Vale had arranged the evidence in careful packets on the library table. The cut bridal slipper strap lay sealed beside the shoemaker's statement. The silver crescent buckle, still bearing its tiny pale blue thread, remained in Isolde's custody, but had been placed in its open rosewood box for review. The groom's white gloves were wrapped in paper marked with the chapel date. The certified extract from the Argent Room's ledger sat beneath the steward's preliminary statement. Miles's words, captured by Mr. Vale's clerk, rested at the top. Withdraw from this chase. Let the gossip fade. Debt relief. Gabriel stood at the far end of the table, one hand braced against the polished edge, his face carved into the severity London knew and feared. Isolde sat opposite him, not because he had placed her there, but because she had chosen the chair from which she could see every piece of proof. Mr. Vale had gone to secure a fuller statement from the club porter. Hannah waited beyond the open door with her sewing, close enough for propriety, and far enough to let silence do its necessary work. Gabriel lifted Miles's statement and set it down again. There is a way to end this before Lady Larkspur's card supper. Isolde looked up. End it or bury it. The question struck exactly where she meant it to. His jaw tightened. Miles's debts can be purchased. By you. Yes, the original ledger page can be secured. The steward is afraid. Men afraid of scandal can often be persuaded into discretion. Persuaded with money. With money, influence, and a promise that his rooms will not be ruined. Isolde's fingers rested on the arm of her chair. She did not grip. She would not let her body announce distress before her mind had finished with anger. And Euphemia. Her father could be approached privately. If shown enough, he may withdraw her from public events for a time. For a time, Isolde repeated. And Miles? Gabriel looked away for the first time. It was brief, but it told her too much. He would leave London. With an allowance? Reduced, but not ruined. He is still my brother. The answer came quietly. It was not defense, it was confession. Isolde rose from the chair. The movement made Hannah lift her eyes from the corridor, but no one entered. I see. Gabriel's gaze returned to her at once. Do you? Yes. You would buy silence. From the men who made my name a stake in their game. You would call it peace, because the drawing rooms would lose interest sooner. You would protect me from hearing my humiliation repeated by ensuring it was never answered aloud. That is not what I intend. No, that is what makes it dangerous. The room became very still. Gabriel did not interrupt. Isolde walked to the rosewood box and looked down at the buckle. Her mother's silver crescent had survived a fall, a scratch, a thread of pale blue silk, and the hands of men who would have preferred evidence to be less sentimental and sentiment to be less exact. At the chapel, they made me stumble before witnesses. At Lady Larkspur's house, they made my marriage look like a wager. At my aunt's house, Miles offered me a quiet version of my own erasure, and now you offer me a more honorable quiet. Her name in his voice held warning and pain. She did not soften, not yet, no. Listen to me. I know you believe money can prevent damage. Perhaps it has, in other rooms, with other scandals. But peace purchased from the men who humiliated me would make me a silent stake again. A valuable one, perhaps. A cherished one, a duchess protected behind curtains. But still a stake. Gabriel lowered his head. The gesture was small, almost imperceptible, but it broke the line of command in his posture. You are right. The words came rougher than usual. Isolde had expected argument. His agreement opened something sharper. Are you saying that because you believe it, or because you have learned that contradiction wastes time? He looked at her then. No shield, no ducal frost. Because I believe it, and because I nearly did again what I promised not to do. Which is, decide the size of the truth you should be asked to carry. Her throat tightened, and she despised that it did. Anger was cleaner. Hurt had too many doors. Gabriel moved one step around the table, then stopped. The distance between them remained proper, visible from the open door, yet the air felt nearer than touch. I was thinking like a duke before I thought like your husband, he said. Worse, I was thinking like a brother who has spent years paying the cost of Miles's weakness and calling the payment mercy. I told myself if I could end the matter quietly, you would be spared, but you have already been spared into ignorance once by me. I will not ask you to forgive the same wound under a better name. Isolde's hand hovered over the rosewood box. She did not touch the buckle. Then ask me. Gabriel drew a slow breath. Do you wish to proceed publicly at Lady Larkspur's card supper, knowing it will expose Miles, damage the Ashenford name, and force every person who laughed behind a fan to hear your voice? Yes. Or do you wish to withdraw? Let Mr. Vale manage formal corrections, and leave London for Cairnwell before society can feed further? No, then I stand beside you, not before me. Beside you, not speaking first. You speak first, not turning my pain into your family's lesson. His eyes darkened. No, into your truth. The answer settled over her like a cloak she had chosen to put on herself. For the first time all morning, Isolde felt the strain of the past days rush through her body. The chapel, the broken strap, the glittering card room, the missing bracelet, Miles's smile, Gabriel's hesitation, his apology, his open hand in the carriage. She had remained upright so long that rest itself seemed perilous. Gabriel saw it. He always saw too much. But this time, he did not command a chair, summon Hannah, or decide that composure required removal. He only asked, very quietly, "May I hold you?" The question did what no gift, title, carriage, or household order had done. It made the room safe enough for weakness because it left refusal alive. Isolde looked at him. The Duke of Celdon, who had faced a chapel full of whispers without blinking, now stood as if her answer mattered more than his pride. She stepped around the table, not far, only enough to cross the space he had refused to steal. "Yes," she said. His arms came around her with careful strength, not claiming, not crushing, only enclosing the tremor she had not wished anyone to see. Isolde stood stiffly for one breath, then another. Then she let her forehead rest against the dark wool of his coat and felt his own breath unsteady once above her hair. It was not passion. It was not rescue. It was relief with a shape. Her hands, which had held evidence, gloves, paper, and pride, slowly rose and rested against him. Gabriel did not speak at first. The silence was different from all the others. It asked nothing. When he did speak, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. "I am sorry. For last night. For last night. For this morning. For every moment I thought protection meant deciding where you were allowed to stand." Isolde closed her eyes. "Do not make me grateful for being included in my own life. Never again." The words were simple. She believed them because they cost him something. At the doorway, Hannah's needle moved steadily through cloth, a small domestic sound anchoring propriety to tenderness. After a moment, Isolde stepped back first. Gabriel let her go at once. Her dignity returned with her distance. But it was no longer armor fitted over an open wound. It was something warmer now, chosen, shared. She lifted the rosewood box from the table and closed it gently over the buckle. "Then, tonight we attend Lady Larkspur's supper. Yes, Mr. Vale will arrange the evidence in order. He will. And Miles will discover that a woman can be wagered upon only by men too foolish to imagine she can count." For the first time, Gabriel's mouth softened into the shadow of a smile. "I would not wish to be one of those men." "No," Isolde said, and reached for her gloves. "You are learning better." The invitation from Lady Larkspur arrived within the hour, carried on thick cream, paper-edged in gilt, requesting the honor of their graces' presence at a final card supper meant, in Euphemia's phrase, to settle all rumors. Isolde read it aloud once. Then she handed it to Gabriel. He did not tear it. He did not toss it into the fire. He placed it beside the evidence packets where it belonged. "Together?" he asked. Isolde looked at the gloves from the chapel, the ledger extract, the cut strap, and the closed rosewood box. Then she looked at the man who had nearly hidden the truth and had chosen, at last, to stand in it with her. "Together," she said. That evening, when they entered Lady Larkspur's house, Isolde's hand rested lightly on Gabriel's arm. Not because she needed to lean, because she had chosen where to place it. The hour before Lady Larkspur's supper felt more dangerous than the supper itself. Danger, Isolde had discovered, often became easiest to face once one had entered the room where it waited. It was the waiting that gave imagination too much leisure. In the morning room of Celdon House, with the lamps lit early against a grey evening, and Hannah seated near the half-open door, Gabriel laid each piece of evidence upon the long table in the order Isolde had chosen. He did not arrange them as a duke preparing a prosecution. He arranged them as a man who had learned that truth could not heal what it excluded. First, the cut bridal slipper strap, wrapped in linen and accompanied by Mr. Pelham's statement. Next, the rosewood box, holding her mother's silver crescent buckle with the pale blue thread still caught in the bent prong. Then the groom's white gloves, folded exactly as they had been found on the altar rail. Beside them lay the chapel message, brief and cowardly. After that came the original Argent Room's ledger extract, certified by Mr. Vale, and the altered copied page Euphemia had displayed at her card evening. Finally, there were the club steward's statement, the porter's admission that he had been paid to carry the gloves, and the notes taken by Mr. Vale's clerk when Miles had spoken too freely in Lady Nestor's drawing-room. Isolde looked at the row of objects and papers. There was nothing grand among them. No jeweled dagger, no blood-stained confession, no dramatic token worthy of a Gothic novel. Only leather, silver, thread, gloves, ink, and the small cowardices of people who had trusted society to complete their cruelty for them. Gabriel stood across from her, his black evening coat severe, his face calm in the manner he wore before battle. Yet she knew him better now. Beneath the calm was fear, not of Euphemia, not of Miles, not of scandal, but of failing her again. "The order is yours," he said. "If you wish me to begin with the ledger, I will. If you wish to begin with the slipper, I will wait." Isolde touched the edge of the table, careful not to disturb the packets. "I will begin with a question." "Which question?" "Why would a gaming clerk write his grace in a margin where no other title is written in full?" Gabriel's eyes warmed, just slightly. A question sharp enough to cut paper. Good. Paper has done enough cutting. His mouth softened, then tightened again, with feeling he would not spend carelessly. "I should have trusted you with the first question from the beginning." "Yes," she said, "you should have." He did not look away. "I am still sorry. I know." "Do you?" "Yes, I know, because you no longer apologize, as if you hope apology will end the matter. You apologize, as if you understand it has changed the manner in which you must stand beside me." The words entered him visibly. Gabriel lowered his eyes to the evidence, then back to her. "I am afraid, Isolde." It was the second time he had said it, and the second time it startled her, not because men did not feel fear, but because men like Gabriel Ashenford had been trained to bury it so deeply that women were left to trip over the consequences without ever being told the cause. "Of tonight?" she asked. "Of what tonight will cost you, of what it will cost my house. Of the possibility that when the room hears the truth, you will remember every moment I nearly chose quietness, and never quite trust the man who stands beside you." Isolde's fingers curled once against the table. She thought of the chapel, of the first time he had bent for her fallen buckle. She thought of the card-room, of his hesitation, of her bracelet on green baize. She thought of his open hand in the carriage and the embrace he had asked for rather than taken. Trust had not returned as a miracle. It had returned in pieces, each one offered without demand. "Trust is not restored by fear," she said. "It is restored by choice." Gabriel was silent for a moment. "And what do you choose tonight? To speak first?" "Yes, To hear Euphemia answer before you present what proves her false. Yes, let Miles stand in the discomfort he arranged for me. A darker look crossed Gabriel's face. Yes, and to enter as your wife, not your rescued mistake. He drew a breath, slow and unsteady enough that she knew he had not hidden all of himself in time. You were never my mistake. No, she said. But you had to learn not to treat me like a responsibility you could repair in private. I did. The admission stood between them, plain and unadorned. Then he took a half step closer, stopping well before impropriety, well before presumption. Hannah's needle moved softly near the door. The house breathed around them, old walls holding new uncertainty. There is one more thing I would ask before we go, Gabriel said. Isolde's pulse changed, though his tone was careful. What is it? Not as strategy, not as comfort, not because I have the right. His gaze held hers. May I kiss you? The room did not spin. There was no violent rush of feeling, no foolish collapse of judgment. Instead, every quiet moment before this one gathered itself. The handkerchief under the buckle, the space he left at her, threshold, the arm offered but not imposed. The hand palm up in the carriage, the embrace that had waited for her answer. Desire, she realized, did not have to feel like danger. Sometimes it felt like being asked. Isolde crossed the small distance between them. Gabriel did not move until she stopped before him. Yes, she said. Then, because yes alone did not seem enough for the woman she had become, she lifted her hand and touched his cheek first. His eyes closed for a brief second beneath her gloved fingers, as if that small permission had undone more of his composure than any scandal could. When he bent his head, he did so slowly enough that she could have turned away. She did not. The kiss was gentle, restrained, and more devastating for its restraint. His lips met hers with a tenderness that asked again, even as it received. Isolde felt no claim in it, no triumph, no attempt to turn gratitude into affection. She felt his fear, his reverence, his apology, and something unnamed that trembled at the edge of speech. She answered, not with boldness, but with certainty, remaining close for one breath after the kiss ended, because she wanted him to know she had not merely allowed it. She had chosen it. Gabriel did not touch her further. He rested his forehead near hers for the briefest moment without making contact, then stepped back as propriety required and feeling resisted. After tonight, he said, voice low, I will not hide behind duty again. Isolde lowered her hand from his cheek. Then do not hide behind silence either. His eyes met hers. No. Hannah rose softly near the door, giving the room the mercy of movement. The carriage was called. Mr. Vale arrived with the evidence case, each packet recorded and sealed, while Mrs. Vale fastened Isolde's cloak at the throat with hands steadier than her eyes. The Duchess bracelet Gabriel had retrieved from Lady Larkspur's table lay in a small velvet tray near the mirror. Isolde looked at it once, then left it there. Not yet. Some things could return only after truth had entered before them. Gabriel noticed and did not ask. That, too, was progress. At Larkspur House, the windows shone gold over the pavement, and music drifted faintly from within, too cheerful for the war waiting beneath it. Gabriel stepped from the carriage first, then turned and offered his hand. Isolde accepted, not because the step was difficult, but because partnership could be visible without being weakness. They entered beneath the stare of footmen, portraits, and gathered guests who had come pretending to settle rumor while hoping to witness its next course. Lady Euphemia stood near a card table, pale blue silk gleaming, a fan in one hand and a playing card lifted in the other. Her smile widened when she saw them. "Your Graces," she said, clear enough for the nearest guests to hear. "How good of you to come. Some brides are fortunate when gentlemen lose." Isolde did not look at Gabriel for rescue. She looked at Euphemia, then at the card between her fingers, and felt the first question settle calmly on her tongue. The room waited for Isolde to bleed again, and, for the first time, she understood how little power that waiting truly had. Lady Euphemia stood beneath the chandelier, with a playing card poised between two fingers, pale blue silks shining around her like a lie dressed for admiration. Lord Miles Ashenford lounged near the mantel, with a glass he had not earned the steadiness to hold. Lady Larkspur hovered close to her daughter, wearing concern so poorly that it almost became fear. Around them, Mayfair's watchers gathered in their jewels, silks, and perfect posture, pretending they had come to settle rumor when every bright eye confessed they had come to enjoy it. Gabriel stood beside Isolde, not before her. Mr. Vale waited near the doors with the evidence case. A Celdon footman remained within call, and the Argent Room's steward, brought in by the solicitor's authority and Gabriel's rank, stood pale near a side table, his hat twisting slowly between his hands. Euphemia lowered the card and smiled. "Some brides are fortunate when gentlemen lose," she repeated. A few guests laughed because they had not yet understood that laughter was about to become dangerous. Isolde looked at the copied page lying beside Euphemia's elbow, the same malicious scrap that had made the room at her last card evening turn upon her marriage. She did not raise her voice. "Lady Euphemia, may I ask why a gaming clerk would write His Grace in a margin where no other title is written in full?" The question passed through the room too cleanly for anyone to dismiss it. Euphemia blinked. "I beg your pardon. The copied page you displayed. It says His Grace expected to claim the lady, yet in the original style of the Argent Rooms, men are not flattered by full titles. My husband's brother appears as Ashenford Minor. The language you presented is not the language of a ledger. It is the language of a drawing room." Someone near the card table drew in a breath. Gabriel did not speak. He let the silence remain hers. Euphemia's fan opened. "Your Grace has become very learned in low establishments for a lady married less than a fortnight." "I was made the subject of one," Isolde said. Learning seemed practical. Miles laughed softly. "Come now, Isolde. No one meant true harm. Wagers are foolish things. Then you will not object to the foolish thing being read correctly." She turned her head. "Mr. Vale." The solicitor stepped forward and opened the case. He did not hurry. One by one, he placed the evidence upon the long card table, and with each object, the room altered. The cut bridal slipper strap appeared first, wrapped in white linen and accompanied by Mr. Pelham's written statement. "The strap," Isolde said, "was not torn when I stumbled at the chapel. It was cut beforehand with a narrow blade so it would fail before witnesses." Euphemia's fan moved faster. Mr. Vale then opened the rosewood box. The silver crescent buckle lay inside, small, scratched, and bright beneath the candlelight, with the pale blue silk thread still caught in its bent prong. "My mother's buckle fell when the strap gave way," Isolde continued. "A thread caught in it, pale blue silk." She looked at Euphemia's gown, but did not accuse from color alone. A thread is not proof by itself. Cruel people often trust one small clue to be dismissed as accident. Gabriel's eyes rested on her with quiet pride, but he still did not take the room from her. Mr. Vale laid down the groom's white gloves next, folded as they had been on the altar rail, and the short chapel message that had declared Miles could not bind himself. "The gloves were too clean for flight," Isolde said. They were placed for display, not dropped in haste. The club porter, brought forward trembling, bowed so low his voice nearly disappeared into his waistcoat. "I was paid to carry them, Your Grace. I thought it a prank between gentlemen. I didn't know there was to be a lady shamed." "Who paid you?" Gabriel asked. The porter looked toward Miles. Miles set down his glass. "Do be careful." The porter swallowed. "A man from the Argent Rooms gave me the coin after Lord Miles's instruction was passed. I heard Lady Euphemia's name spoken. I swear I did." Lady Larkspur cried, "This is outrageous." "Not yet," Gabriel said. His voice was low and the room obeyed it. Mr. Vale placed the certified extract of the original Argent Rooms ledger beside Euphemia's copied page. The steward stepped closer, his face grey. "The original entry did not name His Grace," he said. "It read Ashenford Minor, Chapel Bride, fall before vow. Stake acknowledged. E.L. present." The later copy shown in society was altered. "Lies," Euphemia whispered, but she looked not at the steward. She looked at Miles. Isolde saw it. So did half the room. Mr. Vale produced Miles' debt pledge and the notes from Lady Nestor's drawing room. Lord Miles Ashenford admitted before witnesses that debt relief had been promised if the matter were left alone. Miles' charm finally deserted him. He turned first to Gabriel, then to Euphemia, then to the guests, who no longer looked entertained. They looked cautious. "It was never meant to go so far," he said. "The sentence condemned him more completely than denial would have done." Euphemia's face hardened. "Miles, you said it would be a lesson," he burst out. "You said she would be humbled. I would be free. And Gabriel would have no choice but to manage the wreckage. Your father's man promised part of the debt would be settled if I left the chapel before the vows. You wanted him implicated because you could not bear that he never looked at you." A sound went through the room, not a gasp exactly, but the collapse of collective appetite into collective alarm. Euphemia stood very still. "You're a coward," she said. "Yes," Miles answered, with a bitterness too late to be useful. "But I was not the only one." Lady Larkspur clutched the back of a chair. Across the room, Lord Larkspur, who had been silent until then, stepped forward with the expression of a man watching his family name fall through thin ice. "Euphemia, you will leave the room." "Papa, I didn't." "You will leave London," he said, each word colder than the last. "Tonight, if necessary. There will be no Almacs, no assemblies, no calls, no card parties. You are withdrawn." Euphemia's eyes filled, but not with remorse. They filled with fury at being seen. She looked once at Isolde, and the hatred there was pure enough to be almost clean. Then her mother took her arm and led her out through the watching silence. Miles remained by the mantel, suddenly smaller, without other people's cruelty to lean upon. Gabriel faced him. The room seemed to remember, all at once, that the Duke of Celdon was not merely a husband, but head of the House of Celdon. "You will not return to Celdon House," Gabriel said. "Your allowance is ended beyond what is necessary to remove you from England. Mr. Vale will arrange a continental post where you may learn discipline among men who have no reason to admire your name." Miles looked stricken. "Gabriel, I'm your brother. You made my wife a wager." The words were quiet, final. "Do not ask kinship to shelter what honor cannot." Miles lowered his eyes. He had no answer, because for once charm could not pay the bill. Only then did Gabriel turn to the room. "Before you leave this house, understand what you witnessed. The Duchess of Celdon was not abandoned for fault. She was targeted by debt, jealousy, and cowardice. I also owe her truth before you. I heard rumors of my brother's reckless wagers before I understood her name was involved. And I failed to tell her as soon as suspicion touched her life. That omission was mine, not hers. I mistook silence for protection, and I was wrong. Isolde felt the words pass through her like a door opening. He had not needed to confess that before society to clear her. He had needed to confess it to honor her. Gabriel turned to her then and offered his hand before the room, not as rescue, as acknowledgement. Isolde looked at that hand, remembered the chapel handkerchief, the carriage palm, the embrace he had asked for, the kiss she had chosen. She placed her hand in his and did not let go. Gabriel's voice changed when he spoke again. It became less ducal, and for that reason more powerful. I love you, Isolde, not because I married you in a chapel full of witnesses, but because every hour since has taught me that you were never the woman left behind. You were the woman I was fortunate enough to find. The room disappeared. Not truly, but enough. Isolde saw only him. This man who had been cold enough to command a chapel, humbled enough to apologize, and brave enough now to love without hiding behind duty. Her fingers tightened around his. And I love you, Gabriel, freely, not because you saved my name, but because you learned to stand beside me while I saved it too. No applause came. That would have been vulgar, and perhaps everyone sensed it. Instead, Lady Nesta began to weep silently into a handkerchief, whether from shame or relief, Isolde did not care to know. Mr. Vale closed the evidence case. The steward bowed as if leaving a church. Guests looked away first, which was its own form of public surrender. Gabriel kept Isolde's hand in his until she chose to loosen it. She did not. Would you like to leave London? He asked quietly. To hide? No, to begin. Camberwell Park is ready whenever you wish it. Isolde looked once at the card table where the copied page lay exposed beside the original truth. The game was over. She had not fallen to Celdon. She had walked there, wounded and furious and unbroken, until even the people who wagered on her ruin had been forced to watch her stand. Yes, she said, but not tonight. Tonight they may watch us leave together. Gabriel bowed over her hand, not kissing it before the room, only honoring it. Then the Duke and Duchess of Celdon walked out through Lady Larkspur's silent hall, leaving behind the gloves, the wager, and every person who had mistaken a quiet woman for an easy one. 6 weeks later, Camberwell Park received the morning as if it had been waiting for Isolde to arrive long before she knew she had a home there. The house stood among Kentish fields and old orchards, less severe than Celdon House in London, with warm stone walls, wide lawns and windows that caught the sun without seeming proud of it. Beyond, the terrace, apple trees bent beneath pale blossoms and young leaves, and a long table had been set for an orchard breakfast where tenants, neighbours of good sense, the rector and his wife, and a few carefully chosen guests gathered beneath linen awnings. No one whispered when Isolde crossed the grass. That, more than the title, more than the carriage, more than the formal curtsies, told her something had changed. In London, every eye had made a story of her. At Camberwell, people looked because the Duchess had come among them, and because she listened when the steward spoke of repairs to cottages, and the rector's wife explained the need for blankets before winter. Isolde wore a morning gown of soft green muslin and a pair of new walking slippers made exactly to her instructions. On the left slipper, fastened near the arch, where it could be seen when she walked, shone her mother's silver crescent buckle. It had not been polished smooth. The little scratch remained. The prong had been mended carefully, and the pale blue thread had been removed and sealed with the rest of the evidence in Mr. Vale's archive, along with the cut strap, the gloves, the chapel, message, the altered copied page, the certified ledger extract, the steward's testimony, the porter's admission, Miles' debt pledge, and the clerk's notes from Lady Nestor's drawing room. Nothing had been hidden. Nothing had been burned, lost, or softened into family discretion. The truth rested where truth belonged, preserved. The wound rested where healing belonged, acknowledged but no longer ruling the hour. Gabriel stood a little distance away, speaking with the estate steward. Yet Isolde knew precisely when his attention returned to her. She had learned the feeling of being watched by him, not as society watched, not to measure weakness, but to mark whether she had been left without support. He no longer rushed to rescue her from every conversation. He had learned to let her answer for herself. Still, whenever she looked up, he was there, and the steadiness of it had become its own form of tenderness. "Your Grace," the rector's wife said, placing a folded list upon the table. "The village, school could manage with the present roof through summer, but not through the autumn rains." Isolde read the list, asked 3 questions, and made a note in the small leather book Gabriel had given her the week before. The desk that held its companion papers stood now in her morning room, made of satinwood, fitted with drawers she alone possessed keys to, and stamped with a seal bearing her own, initials beneath the Celdon crest. Gabriel had called it a small, practical thing. Isolde had understood it for what it was. Not a trinket, not a reward for being agreeable, a place for her decisions to live. "We will not wait for autumn to prove a roof leaks," she said. "Have Mr. Benwick send the estimate to me directly, and I will review it before Friday." The rector's wife smiled. "Yes, Your Grace." The phrase no longer sounded borrowed. It did not erase Miss Isolde Trelawney. It stood beside her. A mare grazed beyond the paddock fence, dark-coated and bright-eyed, with a white mark like a falling star on her forehead. Gabriel had shown Isolde 3 suitable mounts upon their arrival at Cairnwell, and had chosen none for her. "That one," she had said, pointing to the mare who had ignored him entirely, and walked straight toward Isolde's outstretched hand. "She seems to have opinions." "Then you will suit one another," Gabriel had answered. He had been smiling when he said it, not the faint shadow of a smile he had allowed in London, but a true one, brief and unguarded enough, that she had thought, with sudden foolish warmth, that the countryside had not softened him. Love had. After breakfast, when the guests began to stroll toward the orchard path and the steward gathered his papers, Gabriel came to stand beside her. "You did well," he said. Isolde looked at him sideways. "As Duchess, as yourself. That is a wiser answer. I have become a student of wiser answers. A humble student? No, but a determined one." Her laughter surprised them both. It was not loud. It did not perform cheerfulness. It simply arrived, and Gabriel looked at her as if the sound had been placed in his keeping. The tenderness in his face made her glance away first, not from shame, but from the abundance of being seen without being judged. "Mr. Vale wrote this morning," Gabriel said, walking with her beneath the orchard trees. "Lord Miles has reached his post. He is apparently finding continental discipline less romantic than disgrace. Good. Lady Euphemia remains at her father's northern estate. No invitations have followed her. Better. Lady Nestor has written to ask whether she may visit in July." Isolde paused. "Did she ask me, or did she ask you to permit it?" Gabriel's mouth tightened with the old coldness, though it was not directed at her. "She asked me. Then she may wait until she remembers whose threshold she wishes to cross. An excellent lesson. I had an excellent instructor in thresholds." He inclined his head accepting both the compliment and the reminder. They walked on. At the edge of the orchard stood Cairnwell's small estate chapel. Half veiled in ivy, its wooden door open to air out the cool stone interior. It was not the London chapel where Miles' gloves had lain, not the place where her slipper had broken, and everyone had watched to see whether she would become smaller. This chapel belonged to the estate, to mourning bells, tenants' christenings, old marriages, and quiet griefs that did not require an audience. Isolde stopped at the threshold. Sunlight crossed the worn stone step. For a moment, the past rose, not as terror, but as echo. The snap of the strap, the silver ring of the buckle, Lady Euphemia's cruel softness, Gabriel's handkerchief held out with the fallen crescent upon it. Gabriel did not touch her at once. He waited, as he had learned to do. "I would marry you again," he said quietly, "without scandal, without fear, without witnesses needing to be corrected." Isolde looked into the chapel, then at the orchard beyond it, where white petals moved in the breeze like harmless snow. "Would you still kneel for the buckle?" His eyes warmed. "Every time." "Would you still ask?" "Every time." She turned toward him fully. "Then I would choose you again. But this time I would walk toward you without stumbling." The words loosened something between them that had not been pain exactly, but memory waiting for blessing. Isolde reached for his hand first. Gabriel's breath changed when her fingers slid into his, because, even now, he never treated her choice as ordinary. He closed his hand around hers with the gentleness that had once saved a carriage ride from loneliness and a morning room from grief. "I love you, Isolde," he said. No room heard him. No enemy could twist it. No guest could admire it. The words belonged only to her. "I love you too, Gabriel," she answered. And because she wanted the saying to live in the body as well as the air, she lifted his hand and kissed his palm. His eyes closed for one brief second. Then he bent and kissed her brow, a quiet touch beneath the chapel arch, tender and unhurried. There was nothing performative in it. No triumph over Miles, no repayment for scandal, no grateful bride rewarding protection. Only husband and wife at a threshold they had reached honestly. Behind them, the orchard breakfast continued in soft voices. Ahead, the small chapel waited, peaceful and unwounded. Isolde stepped from the chapel stone to the orchard grass, not because anyone called her forward, not because rank required it, not because scandal had driven her there, but because she chose the direction of her own feet. The silver crescent buckle caught the morning light with each step, scratched and shining, while Gabriel walked beside her,